Namaste Yatirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukha Swarupaya Swamine Tapaharine. So welcome to the third class on Swami Vivekananda's Raj Yoga, which is one of the most authentic commentaries on Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, popularly known as Patanjali's Yoga. So Swami Vivekananda, as we discussed in our previous classes, in his very elaborate introduction, it's a very elaborate introduction because after half the book is over, we come to the actual Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. So Swami Vivekananda wants us to understand the principles behind the scientific nature of yoga. So that is why he begins with an elaborate introduction explaining how yoga can be compared to any other science. Because that was the need of the day, and that is also the need of today. That religion or yoga, which is applied religion, has got a bad name because for people who claim that they are rational and atheists and scientific, because they believe that religion is based on mere belief, on faith, without any scope or with no scope for reasoning. But that is wrong. At least Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, Swami Vivekananda's elaborate commentary very clearly shows that this book is as much a science of the mind or science of psychology, which he calls the king of sciences. That is what we discussed in our previous class. Psychology is the king of sciences because it establishes religion on a firm and rational and scientific basis, on a foundation of reason. It doesn't go against reason. It explains why religion or yoga should play an important part in our life. So just as scientists take pains to explain why physics, why chemistry, biology, and medical sciences are important in our life, because they solve many of the problems that we face in the world. So similarly, yoga also is a science of the mind. So it is as equally important as the physical sciences and other sciences which humanity has developed. Now coming to its relation, it means yoga's relationship with Hinduism or any religion. Can yoga be a basis for other religions? So Swamiji first in his introduction says that there are two types of religions. First of all, when we try to find out if yoga can form a scientific basis for not only Hinduism but for other religions as well, then you have to see what are the types of religions that are there in the world today. Major religions. There are so many minor religions also. But the major religions can be divided into two according to Swami Vivekananda. One is a religion with books. Books in the sense, only one book is the basis on which the whole religion is based. It may be the Bible, it may be the Quran, it may be some other book on which the followers base their entire religion. Nothing wrong in that, because these books are based on the spiritual experiences of their founder or founders. Now there is another religion, another type of religion which is without books. Now you may ask, why in Hinduism there are so many books? There is Bhagavad Gita, there are the Vedas. In Buddhism there is the Dhammapada, which was compiled 500 years later It was not compiled when Buddha was alive, but his recorded teachings are available to us. So they also have a book. When you say religion without books, what Swami Vivekananda means is a religion which is not based only on the books. They believe on the experiences that are described in the various books. For example, we have the Bhagavad Gita, we have the Vedas, we have so many other scriptures. But importance is given to the experiences that are described, the spiritual experiences that are described in these books. And though they may be recorded experiences of the founders, they never say, the Vedas never say that these are the only experiences. Anybody who follows a particular technique can have these similar experiences. That is what we mean by religion without books. Not that books are not there, but books are not as important as for some religions who believe that if the book says so, I have to believe. So that is the difference. So Swami Vivekananda, he says in the beginning that even Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, which we are discussing now, it is based on yoga. But at the same time, this yoga Patanjali Sutras, never will Patanjali say that because I have said it, you have to accept it. He says, you try it. He's just giving the techniques. So also you will find in Bhagavad Gita and all other scriptures of Hinduism, and also to some extent Buddhism also, because Buddhism very clearly says that Buddha in fact was against the idea of books, because when Ananda, his disciple, asked him, now when you go, what will happen? He said, no, be a light unto yourself. Means I have given the techniques, you have to focus on that, and you have to experience those truths themselves. So in that sense, Buddhism is very close to what Patanjali and the Hindu scripture says. Now, the second point Swami Vivekananda makes is, though they are based on the experiences of the founders of different religions, there should be one common principle. That is the principle of uniformity. What he says, scripture should not say that these experiences are unique to our prophet or our founder or certain category of people. If the experience has happened once, it should happen multiple times, in all situations, in all ages. They should not be time bound or space bound or geographically bound. I can't say because Sri Krishna had some experience, or Sri Krishna speaks of certain experiences in a particular geographical location. It's not only valid for India. It has to be valid for any other continent, any other geographical location in the world. So that is second point Swamiji makes, the principle of uniformity. So in Raj Yoga he says, what has happened once should always happen if there is truth in that, eternal truth in that scripture or that prophet's utterance or the experience of the founder. Now, according to Swami Vivekananda, in his introduction, as I told you, before he starts discussing the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, he is very clear in his introduction that religion or religion of yoga, especially he's talking only of Raj Yoga here because we are dealing with the mind. And he has explained that why we should deal with our own mind and how to deal with it as we deal with other scientific evidences. You do experiments, you use instruments to do experiments, and many things are involved in that. So first rule he makes is, if it is a science, as any other physical science is, it should not be only based on the experiences of the past. Now this is rather strange. Do I not base my sadhana or upasana on the experiences based on the past? It doesn't mean that. For example, now Newton discovered laws of gravitation. It works. But suppose somebody comes and tries to apply those things in a micro world, as quantum physics has discovered. They found to their surprise that Newton's law are not valid in another system. So does that mean they should always hold on to the experiences of the past? Newton was right. He is right even today. It works in some fields, but in some fields you have to base your theories on new evidences. If somebody else discovers some new truth, and if we can validate it, and if we can show that it is universal, it should be accepted. That is why when Swami Vivekananda made the rules, which he was not very keen, but everybody told him, you make some rules for the order, because otherwise there will be confusion. Just as Buddhism, there was so much confusion that after 500 years, they decided to hold a conference, a very big sabha. And that is when they said, let us all collect Buddha's teachings and compile them and see which are authentic, which are not authentic. So there was a very big gathering. And after that, they fixed that this is what Buddha said. So that is what we get today as Buddha's teachings. Similarly, Swami Vivekananda was asked that he should formulate certain rules. He says, see, if you make too many rules, the freedom will be disturbed. You can't make too many rules. Then a person will be bound by those rules. So he said, Vedanta always believes, or yoga always believes, that rules are there just to guide. And any person who discovers a new method of sadhana, he had the courage to say that. He said, I don't even claim that we have discovered all the ways and means of sadhana. God's book of spiritual experiences is not a closed book. He said, if I say the Quran, the Vedas, the Bible, and all these are closed books, then it would be wrong. In Hinduism, always accept that God's book is always open. There are many more pages, infinite pages still to be written. So in the rules, he said, if anyone in the order or a follower of the Ramakrishna order or anyone tries to or discovers a new method of sadhana or experiment, and it is compatible with the eternal values of the Shastras. Of course, it has to be compatible. You can't just say, give anything because it is experienced by you. It has to be a uniform experience. Just as the Vedas don't say that our experiences are unique to us. You practice it. Patanjali says, you practice the way I have formulated it, and then find out for yourself whether they are true or not. If it is not true for you, then there is something wrong. You can reject it. So, the second important point Swamiji makes is, man must experience all these truths of yoga. Here he is referring only to yoga. He has to do it himself. He has to use his own mind to experiment. But he can use the guidelines set about by Patanjali. Now, the third important thing he says is, you can't just haphazardly do this sadhana. The sutras are meant that how should one understand the science behind the control of the mind, as Patanjali has explained. He is not giving anything haphazardly. He is explaining how systematically we can get to higher and higher truths. And of course, Patanjali is very cautious. He says, I am not exhausting all the possibilities. Nor does he say that yoga is the only way. He says, this is my method, you use it. Just as Buddha said, what I realized in my life, I am telling it to you. You practice it and find out the truth for yourself. So he said, Buddha is a state. You can also become a Buddha. It is a state which I, following this particular method, have reached. So he tells Ananda, who is his disciple, that you can also reach the same state, provided, because I followed this method. So Patanjali also says, I have discovered a science. Patanjali is the last of the yoga teachers, the Sankhya teachers before him. No Indian teacher or nobody who is a genuine spiritual teacher will ever say that this is my teaching. They just try to explain it in the language of the present day, using the same eternal teachings. Even Sri Ramakrishna did not say that this is my teaching. He always used to quote. Even if there was a simple example, he would say that such and such scripture says, the Gita says, the Upanishad says. So that is a true scientific spirit, where you may quote other people and use it to establish some scientific thought. So also these religious people, they make use of all the old traditions and develop a scientific approach to religion, and they teach us the science of how to get to those truths. So Swamiji's next requirement is that place before people a practical and scientific method to reach the truth that is claimed. You just can't say this is the truth and not prescribe a sadhana for that. So Swamiji says, in science, as we go to the labs, you have to follow a method and then you come to certain conclusions. Similarly, the postulates or the scientific theories of these yoga teachers is the truths of the sages is a practice. Yoga is a practice. It may be based on the philosophy of Sankhya. Vedanta is not just a philosophy, it's a practice. And the same method is used as in science. This is another point Swamiji makes very clear. If you see all the Vedantic scriptures, which prescribe different sadhanas, Panchadashi, Vedanta Sara, there are so many books on Vedanta, there are so many books on Sankhya, there are so many books on yoga. India is full of wonderful manuals of practice. Mind you, they just don't give a philosophy which is useless. Philosophy may be of interest to academicians, but philosophy doesn't solve anything if it is not practical. So this was the question that very often in the West was asked of Swami Vivekananda, that is Vedanta practical? That's why he had to give those famous 4 lectures on practical Vedanta in Pimlico when he came to London, because till then, most of the scholars and intellectuals thought that religions are based on dogmas and they have no practical value except that you pray and then feel somebody is bestowing their grace on you. You go to churches, get some peace of mind, and you follow a particular religion because you have been told to do so since childhood. So people were rebelling against such a religion in those days when Swamiji came. They said, can your religion or can any religion of the world provide a scientific basis? Because now we are empowered by the power of the scientific method. That is what the contemporary people were telling, that the scientists who were opposing dogmatic religion, mind you, they were not opposing. They said, if you can place your religious truths or spiritual truths on a scientific basis, then we'll accept it because we think our system is fine. And indeed, the scientific spirit was perfectly okay. And that is why Swami Vivekananda said in his Practical Vedanta, Vedanta doesn't claim to be just a philosophy. If you think it is a philosophy which you discuss and then just go home and do whatever you want, you are wrong. It is a science based on certain practices. And these practices are many. Just as scientific experiments can be done in many ways, You can follow Vedanta in many ways, and different paths have been discovered by different proponents of Vedanta, and after practicing them, they have experienced certain truths, and they have followed exactly what Vivekananda says in Practical Vedanta. They have followed the same method which is used by science, which was very popular in those days. So it is even popular. The scientific method is based on universal truths, but the method to discover these universal truths are common. Swamiji says there are three things. First is observe facts. When you say observe facts, it can mean physical data. It can mean other mental data. When you deal with psychology, there is no physical data. There are different thoughts that you have to analyze. When you do counseling, even in Western psychology, you have to follow a scientific method, ask them certain questions in a particular sequence, and try to find out how the mind works. So the data of how thoughts have to be analyzed is also a science of psychology. So also he said, you have to observe facts. In this case, in yoga, Patanjali's yoga, though asanas, pranayama, you observe the prana, see how it is regulated by the body, or how you regulate it to regulate the physical body. You also do asana. Why do you do asana? So that you can be a fit instrument. The mind requires a steady body. If the body is not steady, if the prana is not steady, if it is not able to do an experiment in a steady environment, as in science, you can't do all the experiments. There are many experiments which have to be done in a controlled way. You can't just do it anywhere and everywhere. Even scientists insist that it has to be done in a particular environment. So also here, in the science of yoga, asana, pranayama and all the preliminary steps are just to create an environment, a right environment. Because if your body is not steady with the help of asana, the only purpose Patanjali attributes to asana is, the only value it has is that it should make your body steady. Because a restless body or a restless prana will lead to a restless mind. So his focus is more on the mind. It is a psychology, you have to remember that. And the main purpose and the only purpose of asana, which Patanjali will come to that sutra, he says, is to make your body steady, not to improve your health. Of course, they are the byproducts. If your body is regulated, prana is regulated through pranayama, then they may help you have a good health. But that is not at all the goal of Patanjali. He said it may, but these are byproducts. The real product is that it will help the mind to be calm. Because yoga has been defined in the second verse as chitta vritti nirodha. That which enables to make the vrittis of the mind, to stop the vrittis of the mind as much as possible. To stop the restlessness of the mind. That is the goal behind all the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. And asana and pranayama are gross helps. They definitely help. Because if a person doesn't even have a steady posture, you can observe this in monkeys and other animals. They can't sit quietly. Like the lion, we have seen, normally animals are compared. The lion is considered to be majestic because it is steady. It's not always restless like the tiger or especially monkeys. They are physically not steady. Similarly, asana is meant as a first step to regulate the mind. But asana is not enough because a steady body with a disturbed prana means the five forces that run the body, if they are at conflict, they can be at conflict with each other, maybe because of emotions, because of the mind, or maybe because of the wrong food. See, both sides it acts. Prana is like a sandwich between body and the mind. If the mind is disturbed, if you are emotional, if you are not steady, then prana is disturbed. But if you eat the wrong food, also the prana can be disturbed. So, and then the prana will disturb all other things. So steadiness is not just of the body, not just of the prana, but before we study the mind, the steadiness of body is insisted upon. And that is the only importance of asana. The only importance, I'll repeat. Stiram Sukham Asanam. That is the only asana that anything that makes you steady is asana. Now, you may ask, what about the huge popularity of the yogasanas, which is considered to be the heart of yoga? But at least Patanjali doesn't support it. Because those asanas are for physical health. No doubt they have their own benefits. No doubt they have their own benefits, but not in the system of Patanjali's yoga. He said good health can be a good support for sadhana. But that is not the end in itself. If asana becomes the end, then you get stuck at the second or third stage. If pranayama is the end in itself, you end up focusing mainly on pranayama without knowing why pranayama has to be done. So the definition of asana, the definition of pranayama, and before that, the definitions of yama and niyama, which you will find discussed by Swamiji, are based on sound scientific principles. But what are those scientific principles? Before he discusses, he says, we follow the method, we means the yogis follow, those who study Raj Yoga, they follow the same method as any other science which we do in the laboratory. He says, the scientific method is constituted of 3 steps, 3 basic broad steps. There may be many other steps in between, but one is observe facts. So whatever data you want to analyze, you have to observe it once, twice, make a lot of samples. Then you generalize that if an object keeps on falling with a certain velocity, then this is the law. So you have to generalize that if one apple falls, all the apples also will fall in the same way, depending on their weight, depending on depending on many factors, you may say. So first, observation of facts. But what about yoga? What do you observe? Here, the only observation that you have to do is, of course, you observe the body, you observe the prana, but you also observe the mind, which is the primary concern of yoga. This we have to remember. Now, after observing, you have to generalize. So the generalization is yoga chitta vritti nirodha. So you observe the thoughts. Why do you observe the thoughts? To practice yoga. What is yoga? To stop this restless mind and focus it on whichever point you want. Now, third principle is draw conclusions. Third means the third, observe facts, generalize them, that they happen in all conditions or different conditions. Draw some conclusions based on what you observe. In yoga, you observe your thoughts and come to some conclusion. What are the types of thoughts that make you happy? What are the thoughts that make you sad? What are the thoughts that you have to counter? Using certain thoughts, you have to counter some old thoughts. And then finally, when you have done a lot of experiments in the physical world or in your mental world, then you form certain principles. Now, Patanjali has made it very easy for us because he has already observed it and he has obviously had many disciples. So, and he was himself a disciple of someone. So based on past experiences, based on present experiences, and based on the inputs he got, he formulated these sutras. He never claims that they are his own. In fact, the Buddhists and the yoga school of Patanjali, they say that they have borrowed from each other. If Patanjali came after Buddha, they will say he has borrowed from Buddha. Or if they say Patanjali or his tradition is far ancient than Buddha, then they will say, okay, Buddhism has borrowed from yoga. But the truth is, these were universal facts. Whether Buddhism discovered it or whether Patanjali's yoga teachers have discovered it, because we know Buddha went to so many teachers. He went to some Sankhya teachers also. Sankhya is far more older. So you can say, Patanjali can say, the yoga people can say that our tradition goes back to Sankhya, the founder of Sankhya, who is Kapila Muni. Even beyond that, Kapila also doesn't say, I am the founder. He just formulated certain principles. So also did Patanjali, so also did Buddha, based on his own experiences. Patanjali would not have formulated this if he had not experienced it himself. That is why we say, when we read books, this will be one of the most important things Swami Vivekananda will mention in the introduction. He says time is very short, so just read books which are based on the experiences of validated experiences. You have to see the historicity of these people. Nobody will question the Bhagavad Gita. Nobody will question the Upanishads. But if some XYZ person comes and says that I have experienced this, you will have to think twice before you accept it. So he says it should be based on past experiences, but you should have the freedom to observe facts based on those experiences, generalize, draw conclusions, and then form your own principles. That is what all of them have done. Patanjali's yoga doesn't claim it is a new technique. They say we have drawn upon the experiences of our ancestors or the tradition which we follow, but suited to the present day need. These experiences have been validated in our life, in my life. That is what Patanjali would say. So also Sri Ramakrishna did not teach, though he repeated, he never said he came to found something new. Swamiji very clearly says, we don't want to start another sect by saying though we like his teachings, we follow that method, that doesn't mean that is the only method. That is what Sri Ramakrishna came to teach the world, that I have followed, and in fact he had the advantage of following all the different religions and many methods. Yoga, he followed yoga, he had a Advaita Guru, he had a Vaishnava Guru. So he experimented, as Holy Mother said. He wanted to experiment all the paths, as many paths as possible within his short life. And so that is why he gave authenticity to many of these paths. The four paths, the four primary paths, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Raj Yoga, which are the four major paths possible, depending on the faculties of the mind, the capacity to think, the capacity to feel, Bhakti Yoga, capacity to think is Jnana Yoga, capacity to work is Karma Yoga, that activity, the willpower, and finally the capacity to calm down the mind, restrain the mind. That is the fourth power of the mind, which Western psychology doesn't give so much importance. But yoga psychology bases the whole Patanjali's yoga on the fourth power of the mind. They say power to think is you are using anyway. Power to feel you are using every moment. They will discuss those also in the Yoga Sutras. And also the power to do work, Kriya Yoga, which will come in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. But the primary focus in Raj Yoga is how to control the mind. How to control or how to restrain the mind so that it can manifest its powers. Right now the mind is diverted to thousands of things. So Patanjali says, if you want energy, if you want to practice sadhana, then reduce yoga, chitta vritti nirodha, restrain it, make your life simple. Remove all the complexities because they drain away a lot of your energy. He gives the name kleshas. He defines all our distractions through 5 obstructions which are known as kleshas. The actual meaning of klesha in Patanjali is pain-bearing obstructions. They are self-created. Kleshas are not imported from outside. Though most of the kleshas we are born with, some we acquire it. So, raga, dvesha, abhinivesha, asmita and avidya. Ahankar. Asmita means ahankara and avidya. So these are the 5. We'll discuss that when we come to the sutras. But these are the 5 kleshas based on observations. So he has classified the whole mind, the whole mental behavior into these 5 kleshas. The 5 pain-bearing obstructions, mind you. That is why they compare yoga with Buddha. Buddha also said, don't bother about the discussions on God, whether God is with form, without form. Try to find out what is causing pain in your mind. And there are certain obstructions which are known as pain-bearing obstructions, which are termed as kleshas. Buddha uses the words are different, but he uses the same technique. That's why there's some confusion whether yoga is based on Buddhism or Buddhism is based on yoga. Either way, we don't have to bother because they are all very ancient sciences. Nobody claims that they have discovered this. They say we just experimented on what our ancestors discovered and we are presenting to you. If you like it, you accept it. So, now Swamiji comes to another important discussion where he says the difference between, till now he has compared yoga with science, the scientific method, not with science, physical science, but the scientific method applied by physical scientists of the physical world, scientists of other things like economic world, social world. There are social sciences also. There are legal sciences also. There are so many economic sciences. There are many sciences. Each one applies a different method and each one has different instruments. For example, there is statistical science. So the instruments we use are data, creating database, and then applying these principles to that and finding certain rules for statistical science. So also you go to physics, you observe certain things, natural phenomena, and then you get physical science. Similarly, you focus on the biological aspects of living beings, then you get biology. But every time there are 3 things involved, Swamiji says. One is the data or the objects. Another is the instrument. Now, what is the instrument which you use? Biology, you may use microscope. In the space, you can use astronomical telescopes. So there is an instrument to study these objects. And there are other things, the methods. But in this yoga, what are the instruments? It is very, very different from other sciences, where external sciences are very easy to study because the objects are separate, instruments are separate. Use the instrument and you are a subject. You are doing all these experiments. Whereas here Swamiji says the difficulty is mind itself is an instrument to study the mind. It is like trying to study a microscope or something, a microscope using the microscope, which is very difficult to understand unless we listen to the story from the Kathopanishad, where Yama is telling Nachiketa why it is difficult to study the mind and why a person or why people don't study their own minds. They study everything. In fact, they even study others' minds because it is easy not to study their minds, but from their behavior to make judgments, to come to conclusions. It is very easy. But if somebody tells you sit in a room and study your own mind, it is one of the most difficult tasks. That is what Swamiji says. And not only Swamiji says, Swamiji quotes from Kathopanishad, what Yama said to Nachiketa. Why Raj Yoga is a difficult science, or why spirituality itself, which is the goal of yoga, is a difficult science. Because here the mind is the object of study, and the instrument with which you study your own mind is your own mind. Maybe it is a higher mind, that will come to that later, the concept of buddhi. One higher mind studying the lower mind. It is like, it's a very crude example, but I may use that to convey what studying mind means. Suppose one is a doctor, and he examines every day others, but sometimes he has some symptoms, so he needs to examine himself. It is something similar to that. That is true in the gross world. So he is using his knowledge to examine himself. Similarly, it is not impossible. What Swamiji says, that though it may look like a new way of science, it is equally scientific, that a part of the mind studies the other part. Now, what is the part of the mind that studies the other part? Which part of the mind studies which part? That will come to the, when we come to that sutras. There are many sutras. Now, the next point he maintains, which I'll come to that, telling the story of this Kathopanishad. The first thing he says, yoga tells us, even to study one's own mind, the waves of the mind have to be stopped. So if you try to study a restless mind with another part of the mind which is restless, then it cannot happen. It is like they say, when two trains are traveling, if one train is steady, or one train has stopped, or you are stationary and then the other train passes, you can measure its speed. But if you are on another train and you try to measure the speed of the train, both are moving, then you are not going to get the exact velocity, exact speed. Similarly, he says, one part of the mind, which he will later on, which Vedanta says is buddhi, has to be made calm. And it is possible, because mind, like any other object, has a subject and can be divided into parts. So the calm mind, the concentrated mind, where vrittis have stopped, that can observe the vrittis coming, which is a very great technique used by all the schools of Buddhism. They use this so much that they just say you don't have to have any object of meditation. Just watch your thoughts. They call it vipassana, or many other. Vipassana is one technique, one simple technique, but there are many complicated techniques in Buddhism where you call it awareness meditation, where you are just told to be aware. Just see how the thoughts come. Just don't allow your mind to flow with the thoughts. Just pause for a moment, see what type of thoughts come. Don't get carried away. That's why we make so many mistakes. So the power of the mind to concentrate, make it steady and observe the other part of the mind which is restless, is what this yoga is all about. Now, why it is difficult? That is also a question that is to be answered. Why it is not as easy? That's why people are very good at, they can become expert scientists. When they study the external world, they can be great achievers, but they can be spiritual pygmies, which I used. They are spiritual pygmies because when you ask the same scientists who have that wonderful capacity to study science, if you put them in a quiet place and tell them, now you sit and study your own mind, just as you did all the research in the laboratory with so much of focus. I'm not taking away the credit from them. They are really working hard, whether it is in the lab or whether it is with their equations and all. You find great mathematicians, great scientists focusing. That whole focus, external focus, is so much that all the discoveries that they have made is because of their concentration. But is it the same as the concentration that is spoken of in the yoga? So that we'll understand from a some advice given to Nachiketa, the young boy, who wanted to know the reality, wanted to know, is there a way to understand what happens after death, whether I will be eternal, whether I will be born, what actually happens after death? That was a fundamental question. But then he wanted to know the truth. And he goes to Yama, and Yama tells him, there is a beautiful verse in the Kathopanishad which explains why studying the mind is difficult, or in simple terms, why Raj Yoga is the most difficult of sciences, which Swamiji says. That is why he gives it the name Raja Yoga, because it is the king of sciences. If you study physics, it's a much, much, much lower subject. If you study any other secular science, social science, law, or any other, because the object is very clear in front of you, instruments are very clear in front of you, and the methodology is also there. You undergo graduation, post-graduation, and get a degree and even get a PhD. Those things are done, and people glorify people for that. But this young boy, fortunately at the age of 13 or 14, he felt that these sciences are not doing, I mean, they are great people. His father was one such, who was his guru. But he felt that the science of eternal truth, science to discover the eternal truth, he somehow came to the conclusion, because he had heard the scriptures described by his father, he had listened with full attention, and he got the essence, whereas the father was still in the puja level, and Havan, he wanted to do yajna to go to heaven. And Nachiketa said, you only taught me, but you are not answering it. So he decides the incident will not recapitulate that. He goes to Yama and says that I want to know a thing which even my father doesn't know, or anybody is not able to answer. That's why I come to you, because you are the king of death. If you don't know what death is, what happens, is the life eternal, what is a soul, how do I attain to that, then nobody can help me. So Yama is very happy, because this young boy wants the truth and is ready to experiment. Then he tells him the same thing which Swamiji tells in his introduction to Raj Yoga. He says, Paranchi khani vyatrunat swayambhu tasmat parang pashyati na antaratman. So this is a very important thing which Yama mentions to Nachiketa. When does he tell this to Nachiketa? When he rejects, he is first tempting him with many external things, external glories, name, fame, power, everything. But when Nachiketa rejects it, then he gives him the secret. And he tells him why people are running after all these things and ignoring the greatest of all sciences, that is Raj Yoga. The answer is given, Paranchi khani vetrunat swayambhu tasmat parang pashati na antaratman kaschid dhira antaratmanam aikshat avrutta chakshu amrutatvam icchan. He says, I agree fully with you, because that was his doubt, Nachiketa's doubt. Though he was young, he was wise. He says, you all over the world you have seen and come here, and you are firmly determined. That's why I'm telling you. It is indeed difficult to do research or to focus on the internal states of the mind. The reason is, Paranchi khani, all our sense organs, unfortunately, God has created in such a way that they always go outward. So that outward tendency of the child, the moment he is born, maybe the child is born, he is inward. But the parents, the teachers, everybody teaches him, oh, this is there, this is there. All the education he gets, fortunately or unfortunately, Unfortunately, of course, because he is shown so much of the external world that he, at a certain age, he forgets that there is an internal world. So that is what Raj Yoga points out, that is what Kathopanishad also, Nachiketa is saying, that it is not your fault. He was just a small kid. So, but at least you have asked this question, so I am telling you. The nature of this creator, Prakriti, is such that it is always looking outward. It is looking outward for acceptance, it is looking outward for fame, it is looking outward for many things, for objects, for one's own selfish purpose. But a person who is, even if he is really selfish, these people are not selfish. According to Buddha, those who are looking outward are unselfish people. And those who are really selfish will focus on themselves. They should not bother about the world, because the real treasure is inside. So in a way, he says, Paranchi Khani means God has Vyatrunat Swayambhu, the creator himself has cheated you, or literally killed you by slowly training you, means Prakriti has cheated you to see outside and just be carried away by the outside world. But he says all are not like that. Paranchikani Vetrunad Swayambhu Tasmat Parangpash. That is why people are so extrovert. And extrovert person is restless. Then he says, Kaschid Dhira. But don't think God has created everyone like that. No, he has kept a few people, Dhira, we call them Dhira, Kaschid Dhira, which is the essence of asana and pranayama, Kaschid Dhira, and also Pratyahara, we'll come to that. Kaschid Dhiraha Antaratmanam Aikshat. Some wise people say, just a minute. I don't know whether looking outward is giving me so much trouble. So why not try to look inward, what is inside? Because the person who is concerned is inside. I do everything for me. I don't do everything for other people. If you see very clearly, the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad says the husband thinks he loves the wife thinks he loves the husband, the son thinks he loves the father, but everybody loves others because of them, their own selfish interest. So here he says it is the self they are trying to seek, but unfortunately the God has Vyatrunat, means literally killed them and made them search for their own self outside. And they are not going to find it. But Kaschid Dhira, some people who are Dhira means steady people. One whose minds are steady. Kaschid Dhira, Antaratmanam Aikshat. They try to see that Antaratma, that eternal soul within. Avrutta Chakshu, by controlling. Avrutta Chakshu literally means closing their eyes. But just by closing their eyes, you can't close the mind. What Patanjali means and what Swamiji means and what Kathopanishad means here, Avrutta Chakshu means whenever the mind goes out, you drag it, focus it. And that requires a very courageous person, because only then you can study the mind. So, the childhood training that we get, is predominantly, unless of course you are given this internal training also. I have mentioned it many times. It is the Gayatri Mantra was the main reason why it was given at the age of 6. So that along with this looking outward, he is taught how to look inward also. But that is a different issue. The child has lost the faculty. And unfortunately, Yama says it is not the fault of the child. It is the fault of the creator himself. They have gone to that extent. It's that Prakriti by her very nature is outward. So, the child or the training that he got, he has lost the faculty. Not that he did not have. The child, if you see, after it is born, it is very happy with himself or herself, the young baby. It is only when you distract it, you make it, and then you think you are giving it a great training. But unfortunately, that poor fellow his life has started to be ruined by other people. His innocence is slowly robbed, and then he becomes. That's what Swamiji says. He says the childhood training is to train him to try to make him fit for the external world only. And he has been made, or he has lost his faculty which he had. When Swamiji says he has lost the faculty of observing the internal mechanism of the mind, that means he had that faculty. He was happy, content, and then too much of disturbance has made him lose that faculty. So then finally, we have 3 minutes, we'll conclude, or maybe we can open up for question answers now. But I'll just end with this. What is the use of this dhira? Kaschit dhira antaratma namaikshat avruta chakshu. This is the method. But what happens? Of course, Nachiketa knows what happens after that. But here Swamiji asks, as a scientist would definitely ask, what is the function of my research? What is the function of this medical research? To solve the problem of cancer, to solve the problem of some disease. At least some goal should be there, otherwise why will you do research? So he says, what is the use if I study my own mind? Some use has to be there. So I'll just read what Swamiji says, what it will do to us if we practice Raj Yoga. It will take away all misery, point 1. Then he says, this is very, very similar to what Buddha said. That is why they say Patanjali's yoga and Buddhism have so many things. He starts with misery. He starts with misery of the mind and he tells how to solve it. Patanjali takes a different route, but the goal is same. Now, Swamiji says, this misery, which we will discuss in the Sutras also, misery comes only because of fear and unsatisfied desire. That is what Buddha said, tanha. Tanha means trishna. So trishna is something which makes this, the more desire, the more dissatisfaction, and this misery comes because of fear that one may not reach that desired goal. And then amrutatvam ichan, that he will attain something which is of eternal nature, eternal peace, eternal happiness. And the best and the greatest thing that will happen, which Nachiketa is told by Yama, that for the very reason that you have come here, I am telling you, by this science of looking inwards, you will lose all fear of death. That is another great. And then how to attain, we'll discuss it in the next class. If there are some questions, you can ask. We'll have to wind it up now.
Maharaj, Prithvish here, I have a question.
Yes.
The question is, I am looking at these 8 steps that we have, the yama, niyama, asana, pratyahara, etc. So, how does one practice that in life? Like, does it have to be practiced sequentially? You finish off one, then you graduate to the next, then you learn something, or it's all to be done together?
Yes, we'll come to that. Of course, I'll give you a brief answer now. So your question was, there are this Ashtanga Yoga.
Right.
Unfortunately, we have not come to that point.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, it's okay. I will answer. Because Swamiji will discuss that in the introduction. But when the 8 steps come, there is elaborate methodology to practice those steps. But I can give you a hint. The Ashtanga Yoga doesn't mean that when you do asana, you don't do pranayama. When you do that, you don't do other things like pratyahara. There are 8 Ashtanga, as you said, 8 steps. Pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and then samadhi. So these are the 8 steps in Raj Yoga. But if you go about it scientifically, nothing prohibits you from practicing pratyahara when you are doing asana. In fact, you have to do it. By definition, asana only means having a steady physical pose. Nothing beyond that. If somebody is doing asana for health purposes, then that is not the main purpose of yoga. For health purposes, anybody can do any asana, but then he will not be focusing on pratyahara. But to give a very short answer to your question, whether they have to be done in a sequence, obviously it helps to do it in a sequence, but there is no hard and fast rule. Pranayama can be practiced when you are sitting. In fact, pranayama and asana go together. Control of prana is pranayama, not just control of breath. All the pranas, 5 pranas in the body, they make the mind restless. Also, they make the body restless. So, to remove that restlessness, you have to practice asana, but along with asana, you have to... asana, person may be in a wonderful asana where he is not moving physically, but his prana is so violently pulling him in different sides that after some time he is forced to get up. Or even if he's sitting in asana, it is something forced. He's just waiting for the time to elapse so that he can get up and go away. We can see that. When people struggle, when they try to sit in one place, you know that the prana is not allowing. So all have to go together. And why is this prana agitated? It is agitated because the mind is restless. So Patanjali comes to the main reason why we are restless is yoga chitta vritti nirodha. He says the main reason is your restlessness of the mind. So if you deal with that, then you can deal with prana. So that way you can see, you can come upside down or go from bottom up. Both have to be employed simultaneously. Okay? So there is no hard and fast rule.
Thank you, Pranam Maharaj. Thank you.
Pranam Maharaj, I have 2 questions. One is, when you were answering Prithvish's question, you said that in the introduction of Raja Yoga by Swamiji. So are we still in the introduction or...
introduction is half the book.
Oh, okay, you did mention that. Okay, another thing in the... Yes, right. Another thing in the earlier part of the lecture, you mentioned about the 4 lectures given by Swamiji in Pimlico regarding how practical the Vedanta is. Practical.
Yes.
So, where do we... is there any book on that, on the special for this?
So that book is known as Jnana Yoga. It has nothing directly to do with this particular Patanjali discussion. But still,
it is
the ideas are good. No, it is available. The name of the book is Jnana Yoga, which are compilations of all his talks, mostly the London talks, most of which were delivered in Pimlico. So there is a hall there, the Institute of Artists, Royal Institute of Painters in Watercolors. Though now the building is used for some other purpose, there was a Princess Hall where he gave a series of lectures which are now known as Jnana Yoga. Of course, there are some other lectures from New York added to it, but the practical Vedanta and seeing God in everything is he delivered in London. But what I said was that is nothing directly to do with this Raj Yoga because it is a different subject.
Right.
But my point was the practical utility of any science, whether it is the science of yoga or whether it is the science of Jnana Yoga, science of Bhakti Yoga, all the sciences, though there is a theoretical framework as described in the various scriptures, an academic understanding will not help. It has to be practiced. So if it is practiced, that is why the question was, when Vivekananda came to England, they said, you are talking about this Vedanta philosophy. Is it practical? How does it help me in my life? So to explain that, he gave those 4 lectures. Raj Yoga also similar. Raj Yoga, of course, everybody knows yoga is something we have to practice. It is not just a theory.
Right.
So it is a practical science. So there are doubts whether Vedanta also is just a philosophy or it is a practical thing. So he says, no, Jnana Yoga is also practical, Karma Yoga is also practical, Bhakti Yoga also is practical. Because we have emotions, we have thought, thinking capacity, we have all these faculties of the mind and you have to develop them equally.
Okay. Got it. Got it, Maharaj. And one last question. You just mentioned to Prithvish that about the prana being the restless. So one thing is prana means breath, but you also said that breath we can control, but other pranas can be controlled.
Yeah. So I'm repeating the question for the benefit of others. You have asked me that prana makes I mentioned in my talk that any disturbance in prana will make us restless, physically as well as mentally.
Right.
So your question is now, breath you understand, but what about the other 4 pranas?
Right.
That is the question.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now the thing is, breath is not the only prana.
Right.
But when you say pranayama, you should never understand that pranayama is just control or regulation of breath. Though it is the easiest and the most grossest prana, we handle it. We go from controlling the breath to the other pranas. The other 4 pranas, prana, samana, vyana, apana, udana. The other 4 pranas are more important, not only more important, of course breathing is important, but the other pranas are also important because they cause so many. For example, samana is digestion, the assimilation of the nutrients in the body. If your digestion is not good, definitely your prana will be disturbed. You will be susceptible to many diseases. So from the physical side,
right.
But disturbance in digestion can also affect your mind. That is why, when Adbhutananda was, so Latu Maharaj, when he went to, he was praying to Thakur that please see that my digestion is okay.
Right.
And they said, what kind of, you could have asked for spiritual experiences, you were asked. He said, see, if the digestion is okay, other things I can take care of myself. When my stomach goes out of order, because he had to beg food from outside.
Right.
So very often he found that because of lack of proper food, and he used to do bhiksha, he used to often fall ill. And when he fell ill, he could not meditate. He said, meditation I can do. I can control all the pranas, but you take care of my digestion. So it's just a example I'm giving you, but all pranas are equally important. And they are connected to each other, mind you. And they are also connected to our emotions, our mind. That is why mind can influence the pranas, and diet and change in physical habits also can influence prana. So both ways, the life force, which is prana, samana is one force, vyana is another force. That is why they say some blood pressure and other things may not be just due to cholesterol. It can be because of disturbed mind. The pressure may suddenly go up. It may be due to physical causes, wrong food and cholesterol and other things. But there are many other factors.
Okay, so we can control all of them through our mind?
Yes.
Through our mind? Through Raja?
No, not just, no. That is the wrong idea, that you can control everything through the mind.
Okay.
Then you will ask me the question, can I control my blood pressure also? Can I control, then I'll never be sick. No, that is not, you have to control it. That's why 8 steps are there.
Okay.
So yama, niyama, regulated life, regulated, perhaps diet also is necessary. Many things are required. It's a very complex personality. Yeah. So human personality is very complex. You can't say just because of the mind the prana becomes restless. Though it is one of the major causes. That is why when you say psychosomatic diseases, psycho means the mental thoughts that are responsible. Somatic means the biological causes. Wrong food, wrong habits. Yeah. Okay? Shall we conclude? Is there any question?
Any more questions?
No. You have a question? You can ask.
I was going to ask, Swamiji said, while in meditation...
Yeah, there's one more question. Just somebody's asking here.
While in meditation, if the thoughts stops and you are still, and then Swami said, there's another part of the mind is used to look at that thoughtless state.
Yeah, I'll tell you. Yeah. I got your question. I'll answer. The question is that I mentioned during the course of my talk that one part of the mind becomes still. Then if If the mind is still, then where is the question of other thoughts coming up? You see, this is a very important question. Mind observing mind. It is a very, very difficult thing to understand. It will be very clear to you if we discuss the steps, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana. We have not come to that. But to give a very simple explanation, what does it mean by mind watching mind? Swamiji says that one part of the mind watches the other part. Now, in Vedanta or in yoga, the mind has been divided into manas and buddhi. This is a fundamental difference between Western psychology and Indian psychology. So, buddhi is that portion which you develop, which unfortunately should have been or should be part of our education. That is why Gayatri Mantra is given. Gayatri Mantra, the main purpose of Gayatri is you go on praying to the Lord, you give me a lot of intelligence. That is manas. As I told you, there are two parts. Manas is a reactive mind and buddhi is the decision-making mind, the introspective mind. So, our Vedanta philosophy and yoga makes the distinction between these two minds. One mind helps us to excel in external life. All our skills, all our sciences, that mind is always restless because it has to be curious, it has to think over many things, so there will be so many thoughts. So that mind is known as manas, or it is also known as reactive mind. It reacts to almost everything. Even a Buddha, if he sits here, he will react. He will definitely, if somebody asks a question, he has to react. So no mind, if his mind is totally non-reactive and he has attained, then he will be in samadhi, he will not be able to communicate with you. Any person who stills his mind. So stilling of the mind here means one part of the mind which is known as, that faculty has to be developed. That is when spirituality begins. That training has to be given for a very long time, mind you. Gayatri was given at the age of 6, not afterwards. 6 to 8, the child was told that don't just bother about your marks and the excellence in the skills that you are developing. That is part of your livelihood. But at the same time, develop this faculty to take the right decisions, right choices in life so that you don't become unhappy later on. So this mind which is focused, which is controlled, which results as a result of either repeating Gayatri Mantra or any other mantra or just meditation. There are so many ways, techniques, thousands of techniques of meditation which will help us develop buddhi. At the same time, the mind also functions. So there are two aspects of the mind. So the buddhi watches over the mind and does not allow it to make wrong decisions. You got my point? But for that, the buddhi has to be steady. Ekatmika buddhi. In Gita, there is a word known as ekatmika buddhi. That which is one-pointed is ekatmika. It is not wavering. If your mind is wavering, then you will make wrong decisions. If your mind is steady, no matter what the mind tells you, the lower mind, manas tells you, you take the right decision. You are not disturbed by external circumstance. So, shall we conclude? I think I have answered the question. Yeah.
Yes, Maharaj.
Okay, Maharaj.
Yes, we'll conclude.
Yeah.
Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.